Hello everyone and welcome back. It's great to speak to you all again. A short while ago update 4 came out and I put out a little video about update 4 changes to Portal, some of the core changes to the web builder, and I'm just going to put a link up at the top right hand corner. If you didn't catch that video, please do check that out. It just runs through some of the core changes that happen to the web editor and gives you a little bit of an overview of those changes. In addition to those changes that were mentioned in that video, there were also, shortly afterwards, a few changes to the logic editor. And in this video, I'm just going to look at those changes to the logic editor itself and point out a few of the new blocks and just explain a few of them as we go along. As always, if you like the video, please do click the like button. It does help me with the YouTube algorithm. And if you haven't done already, please do consider clicking the subscribe button. It doesn't cost you anything, but it does help me on my way to my 1,000 subscribers that I am plodding slowly ever closer to. Right, without further ado then, let's crack on and have a quick look at these changes to the logic editor. So here we are in the logic editor. You can see the toolbox on the left hand side. I'm going to run through a few of the changes in the logic editor for you. However, just before we do, I'm going to look at the one thing that was mentioned by quite a few people to me, just the one particular block, and we're going to find that block under the player section. You can see under the player section we've got this IsPlayerValid block, and I'm just going to start right off with the IsPlayerValid block and explain what's going on there. If you right click on the IsPlayerValid block and click on help, you're going to get a rather unhelpful piece of help, but it is there. We can see we've got IsPlayerValid and it says it returns true whether or not the provided player is valid, and you can see it needs a player to go in the input part of it, and it will return a bool or it will return true or false. So just underneath that we've got this rather useful little example, and we can see that the IsPlayerValid block has this block inside it, and this block is the closest player to block. The closest player to block takes a position or a vector and returns the player that is closest to that particular position or that particular vector. So this block should bring us back a player, whichever player is closest to that vector. But what if it doesn't return as a player? What if it returns as something else? What if it returns nothing? Well, we can't really check that, or at least we couldn't do previously, and that could have caused errors in our experience. We could have had problems caused by that. Well, now we can check defensively to make sure that before we do anything else, we have actually had a player returned. So if we put this particular block inside the IsPlayerValid block, and the IsPlayerValid block returns true, yes, that particular block has returned an actual player, then we know that there is a player that is closest to that particular vector. Now, up until this point, I've not found that particularly useful. I guess it's because I've just always been assuming that there will be a player available, but I can think of scenarios where this might cause us some problems, where we may run into problems, particularly if players join or leave a game. So I've just cleared my screen and I'm just very quickly going to give you a practical example of how this block might apply in an experience, and I'm sure as the days and weeks go by, other people will find more uses for this particular block. But let's imagine that you've got a game of VIP, or there is a player that you want to assign to be the most important player in a game. So let's just start off. We'll do this very quickly. We're going to add a variable, and you can see I've already created one. I've called that important player. Okay, so in this mod just here, we're going to create a rule, and we are going to add our mod, and we're going to make it on player deployed, and we are just going to add a condition in here, and we're going to say if the player that is set to important player is not a valid player. So for example, there is no player stored there, then when this player is deployed, store that player in there. I hope that makes sense. So we're going to go with logic, and we're going to say not, and then we're going to get the player IsPlayerValid. Let's drop that in there, and we are now going to get the variable, get variable, there we go, and that's it. And then inside this little block, we're going to set the variable to be the event player. There we go. So in this case, we've got on player deployed. If there is no valid player stored in the variable important player, then we are going to set the important player to be the player that is just deployed. Now, this could be very, very useful for a number of different reasons. Let's say at the start of the game, everybody's deployed and one of those players is selected at random to be the event player. But then they leave in the middle of the game. So this variable now no longer has a valid player stored in it. Well, that's all right. We can check to make sure that there is still a valid player in there. And if there isn't, then either we're going to have to do some protection in a program or in our experience, or we're going to have to store another player in there. Now, I don't want to go too deeply into this because clearly this is only really just a short video to run through some of the rules. But as you can see, IsPlayerValid checks to see whether whatever it has been given, in this case it's a variable, but in the example that is shown in help, we've got this particular block returns a player. All it says is there a player actually there? If there is, give me true, and if there isn't, give me false. Right, I hope I've explained that well enough. If not, I'm sorry. Please do drop in the comments if you've understood, if you want a bit of further clarification. So that covers the IsPlayerValid block, but there have been some additional blocks added, and I'm just very quickly going to run through those. I'm not going to go into as much depth as I have done with the IsPlayerValid. I'm just going to point them out to you, and maybe you might find these additional blocks useful in your experience. I will explain them as we go, but we're just going to have a little bit of a look. Now, if we have a little look under the arrays section, I did notice this could have been something that happened a little bit of a while ago, but we can see we've got this convenience subheading down here. There used to be a convenience tab on the left hand side. I don't know at what point that moved over, but you can see we've got some little blocks just placed under the convenience. So the convenience section, I don't know how long ago that was actually, I wasn't paying too much attention. But the convenience section has moved out of the toolbox on the left hand side as an extra tab and has been placed in a section under the arrays. It's not a bad idea, isn't that, to be honest? Now, if we move down to the math section in the toolbox, you can see that we've got some additional blocks straight away just up at the top. These are all to do with working out the arc, sine, cosine, and tangent in degrees and radians. Now, I think it's a little bit outside of the scope of this YouTube video just to give you a bit of an oversight of what these do, but they are to do with finding missing angles. If we just have a quick look on the arc, cosine in degrees, for example, and click on help, you can see it returns the inverse cosine of a provided number value in degrees. Not much use if you don't understand maths, but if you're trying to work out angles between 2 points, it is particularly useful. So the arc cosine, if we put in here, the adjacent side divided by the hypotenuse of the triangle. I have done some videos on triangles earlier on, but I'm not going to go through those again today. It will give you the missing angle, the angle that you are looking for. Now, I know in some of my comments section a little while ago, some people have been discussing how to find out missing angles. I actually think that these might be useful for you. If you're not a mathematician, if you don't understand what those particular functions do, then I'd probably leave them alone. For most people who are building basic logic editor or basic builder experiences, they're probably a little bit out of the scope for those that you need. I may come back to those later on. We may have a look at some practical uses for them, but for right now, it is curious that they've added these additional ones to the math section. I think some of you out there may well find those useful. Now, as far as core changes go to the logic editor additions and that sort of thing, that just about covers it. We've got those as new blocks. So we've got IsPlayerValid, we've got the rules to do with angles, and then we've got some small changes with some things getting rearranged. It's great to see the logic editor getting developed that way. I do have a couple of additional things just to mention while we're here. There are a few things mentioned on Discord which I just wanted to mention to you. The first thing is it was mentioned that the if statement has become a little bit more responsive. If we just click there, I haven't noticed it being vastly different, if I'm honest. However, other people may tell me different. It does still shake things out if you add additional else if blocks and if blocks. Let's just copy this down a little bit. So I'd really like to see that fixed if possible. Let's get rid of that one. That would be expected. Let's just drag that one back in. You can see it's shaking out the block as it moves down. Not particularly useful, especially if you have a lot of else if statements nested together. I'd like to see that blocked. I haven't really noticed that that's much more responsive, but it is marginally better, I think, if I'm being honest. So one final thing before I finish for this week on this particular update. I have been told that there is a block that is currently disabled. It's currently there. possibly ready to go, but it's not currently enabled in the logic editor, and that block is the isCurrentMap block. And I have to say that if this particular block gets enabled, that would be really, really useful to everybody. We know that over on bfportal.gg, some people have come up with very unique ways of identifying which map we are currently on, but wouldn't it be great if we had a block that just returned the name of the map that we were currently on, and we could use that to tailor the experience without having to go through anything overly convoluted. So I'd really like to see that that block was enabled as soon as possible. I don't think there's anything particularly challenging about enabling that block. I'm not quite sure what we're waiting for that block to be enabled, but the sooner it is enabled and we have access to it, the better. Right. Aside from a few other changes that have been mentioned, I do think, generally speaking, that the rules editor just looks cleaner than it did when it started. I know that's a bit of a weird thing to say, but everything just looks a little bit sharper. I've been told that the little block backgrounds are a little bit darker, or they've been turned black. I'm not quite sure. I don't really notice these small things, but generally speaking, I am finding the logic editor is getting slicker and slicker as we move along, and that's really great to see. Right, okay, I've got some more stuff coming up soon. Don't forget, if this has been useful to you, if you found anything out today that you didn't know before, it would be brilliant if you just click the like button, as always. And if you haven't subscribed already, please do subscribe. Not many people subscribe. Most people watch and then don't click the subscribe button, but it really doesn't cost you anything, and it really helps me get towards those 1,000 subscribers. Right, thanks very much for watching. I'll catch up with you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.